A fishing net hauled up a 10,000-year-old harpoon from the empty sea. This single artifact is a clue to a vanished continent, a lost Stone Age civilization that lies submerged beneath the North Sea. By the end of this journey, you will understand how a thriving human world was erased by rising waters and what its discovery means for us today. We will uncover how modern science maps ghostly landscapes and why ancient tsunamis might linger in our oldest myths. What does a drowned world tell us about our own place in history? That harpoon was pulled from a world that no longer exists. To understand the civilization that crafted it, we must step back thousands of years and see the planet not as it is, but as it was. At the peak of the last ice age, the Earth was a profoundly different place. Enormous ice sheets, miles thick, covered much of the northern. Much of the world's water was frozen into these towering glaciers that global sea levels plummeted. They were over 100 meters lower than the shorelines we know today. This dramatic shift in sea level did not just create more coastline, it revealed an entire continent. Where the stormy waters of the North Sea now churn, there was once a vast, low-lying plain. This was a lost bridge of land that physically connected the island of Britain to the mainland of Europe, from what is now the east coast of England all the way to the Netherlands and Denmark. Picture it not as a barren, frozen wasteland, but as a rich and varied landscape. As the ice slowly retreated, it left behind a geological canvas of incredible diversity. There were rolling hills and gentle valleys carved by ancient rivers. Dense forests of pine and birch provided shelter. Expansive grasslands, known as Mammoth Steppe, stretched to the horizon, supporting huge herds of grazing animals. Winding rivers fed into sheltered lagoons and marshes, creating a mosaic of environments bursting with life. This was a land of giants and migrations, where woolly mammoths, giant deer called megaloceros, and powerful aurochs, the wild ancestors of cattle, roamed freely. Reindeer moved in vast herds, and predators like wolves and bears followed in their wake. This was the stage. A rich, interconnected ecosystem offering everything a hunter-gatherer society needed to not just survive, but to thrive. The geological conditions created a perfect habitat, setting the scene for a long and complex human story. For thousands of years, communities walked this land, hunted these animals, and navigated these rivers, leaving their stories not in written records, but in the very soil beneath the waves. Their entire world, this geological canvas, was destined to vanish, leaving only cryptic clues for us to find. The story of this lost world's rediscovery is written in the mud dragged up from the. For generations, fishermen working the rich fishing grounds of the North Sea have pulled in more than just fish. Their nets have hauled up strange and ancient cargo, objects that seemed entirely out of place in the cold, dark depths. These were the first whispers from. Alongside cod and plaice, trawlers would find enormous, curved bones too large for any modern animal. They would discover sharpened pieces of flint, worn smooth not by the sea, but by a human hand. For a long time, these items were simply curiosities, oddities kept on a shelf or discussed in the warmth of a pub after a long day's work. They were fragments of a story no one yet knew how to read. But these accidental finds were the vital first clues. They were the tangible proof that something profound lay beneath the waves. The turning point came with one specific artifact, a discovery so elegant and purposeful it could not be ignored. It was a harpoon point, skillfully carved from the antler of a red deer. This was not a crude tool, but a sophisticated hunting instrument, designed with barbs to hold fast in its target. Its craftsmanship spoke of experience, of a deep understanding of materials and survival. This object, now known as the harpoon, was a message in bone. It told researchers that people were not just passing through this landscape, they were living in it, mastering it, and depending on its resources for their survival. These trawler treasures forced a complete shift in thinking. Scientists could no longer view the North Sea as a barren, ancient seabed. They had to see it as what it truly was, a drowned continent, an archaeological site of unimaginable scale. Each bone tool and flint scraper pulled from the mud was a single puzzle piece, scattered and shuffled by time and tides. Yet together, they began to outline the shape of a missing picture, a lost chapter of human history resting silently on the ocean floor. This raised an urgent and exciting question for researchers. If these few chance finds held so much story, what unimaginable treasures remained hidden in the dark? Waiting to be found, mapping this vanished country requires listening to echoes from the deep. The primary tool for this ghostly cartography is not a shovel, but sound. Scientists use a technology called seismic reflection, data often collected by ships searching for oil and gas deposits. These vessels send powerful pulses of sound down through the water and into the seabed. As the sound waves hit different layers of sediment and rock, they bounce back, creating a detailed sonic fingerprint of everything hidden below. It is a form of underwater ultrasound, painting a three-dimensional picture of a buried world. The results are astonishing. These scans peel back the blanket of modern mud to reveal the perfectly preserved topography of an ancient land. We can see the gentle slopes of hills that felt the sun 10,000 years ago. We can trace the winding, dendritic paths of forgotten rivers, their channels still carved into the earth. We can identify the basins of vast lakes and the smooth curves of long-lost coastlines. One of the most dramatic features discovered is the river, a colossal waterway that once acted as the main drainage for melting ice from the north. Its immense, buried channel tells a story of powerful, relentless flow, of a landscape being actively sculpted at the end of the Ice Age. But a map of shapes is only half the story. To understand what this world felt like, scientists need to know what grew there. This is where core samples become vital. Specialized ships drive long tubes deep into the seabed, pulling up cylinders of layered sediment, a vertical timeline of geological history. Within that mud, scientists find microscopic treasures, ancient pollen grains and tiny plant fossils perfectly preserved. By identifying these particles, they can read the changing chapters of its environment like a book. One layer might be dominated by pollen from hardy grasses and sedges, painting a picture of a cold, open tundra where reindeer herds grazed. A deeper, younger layer might show a sudden explosion of tree pollen, pine and birch, signaling a dramatic warming period where forests marched across the plains, transforming the hunting grounds and resources for the human inhabitants. This combination of technology is what breathes life into the ghost landscape. The seismic data gives us the stage, the mountains and valleys and rivers. The core samples provide the set dressing, the forests, the meadows, the wetlands. Together, they allow us to do something remarkable, to mentally reconstruct a walk across that lost world. We can follow the path of a hunter along the ridge of a hill, looking down into a forested valley where a river, long silent, once flowed toward a distant shore. This reconstructed landscape sets the scene for the most profound question of all, not just what the land looked like, but what happened to the people who called it home. The people who walked those hills were masters of adaptation, living in a period archaeologists call the Mesolithic, the Middle Stone Age. This was a long, dynamic chapter between the retreat of the colossal ice sheets and the revolutionary shift to farming. Their world was not static, it was a landscape in constant flux, warming and greening around them. To survive here was to be an expert in change. These communities were far more than simple survivalists. They were sophisticated residents of a rich continent. We know they established seasonal camps, likely returning to favored locations near reliable water sources or abundant game. The tools they left behind speak of deep knowledge and skill. They crafted razor-sharp arrowheads and delicate microliths from flint, tiny blades that could be set into wood or bone to create composite tools. From the animals they hunted, they made use of everything, shaping antler into sturdy harpoons and bone into fine needles for sewing hides, suggesting clothing that was both functional and tailored. The presence of burnt mounds and ancient hearths, along with finds like charred hazelnut shells, tells us they harnessed fire not just for warmth and protection, but as a kitchen tool. They were processing plant foods, possibly smoking fish and meat to preserve it, turning the bounty of the land into sustainable meals. This points to a varied diet and a scheduled rhythm to their year. Their society was almost certainly mobile, moving with the herds and the seasons across the vastness of. They would have followed reindeer in the cooler months, and perhaps gathered at rich coastal estuaries or river junctions when salmon ran or nuts ripened. They likely used dugout canoes or skin boats, making the intricate network of rivers and lakes their highways, connecting distant communities and allowing them to exploit aquatic resources far offshore. This paints a picture of a resilient, knowledgeable culture deeply with their environment. They read the land like a map and the seasons like a calendar. Their identity, their stories, and their very understanding of the world were rooted in the plains, forests, and waterways of this now-drowned realm. This realization makes their ultimate fate not just a geological event, but a profound cultural vanishing. A unique way of life, refined over countless generations, was facing an encroaching threat it could not outwalk. The very seas that provided food and pathways were beginning to rise, quietly claiming the edges of their world. The warming climate was rewriting the rules of life in. This was not a sudden event, but a slow, relentless transformation unfolding over centuries, reshaping the very ground beneath the feet of its inhabitants. As the great ice sheets continued their retreat northward, they did more than just reveal land. They changed the fundamental character of the continent. The cold, dry Mammoth Steppe, with its vast grasslands perfect for grazing giants like reindeer and mammoth, began to shrink. In its place, a new world grew. First came the pioneer trees, pine and birch, their pollen carried on the wind and eventually settling in the mud of lakes and bogs, where it would lie preserved for. These forests offered new resources, shelter for different animals, and a completely altered landscape for hunting and gathering. Later, as temperatures climbed even higher, more demanding trees like oak and hazel arrived, creating dense, mixed woodlands. The evidence for this profound change is captured in miniature, locked within the mud cores pulled from the seabed. Scientists sifting through these sediment layers can read the shifting pollen like pages in a diary. A layer rich in grass pollen tells of open plains. A sudden spike in pine pollen marks the arrival of the first forests. This botanical record is a climate clock, ticking through the seasons of a lost world. For the people of, this environmental shift was a constant challenge to adapt. The great migratory herds of the open steppe were replaced by more solitary forest animals, like red deer and wild boar. Hunting strategies had to evolve, from tracking herds across wide plains to stalking elusive prey through dense woodland. Toolkits changed as well, with a greater emphasis on smaller, more versatile projectile points suited for forest encounters. Their entire cultural knowledge, passed down through generations, had to be updated for a greener, warmer world. Yet, this same warming that brought forests also carried the seed of doom. All that melting ice from the retreating glaciers had to go somewhere. It flowed into rivers and eventually into the world's oceans, causing global sea levels to rise inch by inch, year by year, in a process called glacial melt. The very forces that made the interior of more hospitable were simultaneously attacking its edges. The coastline began a slow, inexorable retreat, swallowing the low-lying plains, marshes, and river valleys first. The people would have witnessed this change within their own lifetimes, seeing familiar fishing grounds vanish, or returning to a seasonal camp to find it closer to the new shoreline. They were adapting to a changing landscape, while that landscape itself was literally shrinking beneath the waves. This sets the stage for the final, catastrophic act in the story of a disaster that may have echoed in the oldest stories of our species. These rising waters left behind silent witnesses, preserved in the mud and sand. Along certain stretches of coastline in Britain and the Netherlands, during the fiercest winter storms, the sea temporarily pulls back its curtain. What it reveals is not sand or rock, but a landscape frozen in time. Dark, waterlogged peat beds lie exposed, and within them, the thick, gnarled roots and stumps of ancient trees stand firm, still anchored in the soil where they grew thousands of years ago. These are the submerged forests of, and they are perhaps the most haunting physical evidence we have. This is not a theoretical landscape modeled on a computer screen. This is the actual ground upon which people walked, the very trees that provided them with shelter and resources. To stand before one of these exposed stumps is to touch a world that vanished beneath the waves. The trees themselves, primarily oaks and pines, hold a precise calendar within their rings. Scientists use a method called dendrochronology, which is simply the study of tree ring patterns. Each year, a tree adds a new ring of growth, and the width of that ring tells a story about that year's climate. A wet and warm year produces a wide ring, while a drought or a cold snap leaves a narrow one. By taking core samples from these submerged trunks and matching their unique pattern of wide and narrow rings to master chronologies built from ancient wood across Europe, researchers can achieve something remarkable. They can determine the exact year and even the season when that tree was growing. More importantly, they can pinpoint the year it died, overwhelmed by as the sea finally claimed its forest. These wooden sentinels provide a direct timeline for final chapters. They tell us that vast, verdant woodlands of oak and pine flourished across the region for centuries, a testament to the warming climate that followed the Ice Age. The presence of such mature forests confirms that this was a stable, resource-rich environment capable of supporting human communities long-term. But the tree rings also record the moment of catastrophe. A cluster of trees, all showing their final growth rings in the same narrow band of years, paints a clear picture of a rapid drowning event. The sea did not always advance gently. Sometimes it surged, swallowing whole forests in a generation. Finding a stone tool on a trawler's deck is one thing, but seeing the root system of a tree that a Mesolithic hunter might have rested beneath is an entirely different connection. It collapses time. These stumps make the past immediate and sensory. You can almost feel the texture of the bark, smell the damp earth of the forest floor, and hear the wind moving through a canopy that has been silent for. They transform from an abstract concept into a real, tangible place that was once as alive and green as any forest we walk through today. This evidence solidifies a profound truth. The story of this lost land is not just one of geology and climate, but of ecosystems and the people who knew them intimately. And as the forests drowned, those people faced impossible choices, their world shrinking faster than they could adapt. Then came the wave. While the rising seas were a slow, creeping threat, the people have also faced moments of sudden, unimaginable violence. Around 8,150 years ago, an event occurred off the coast of Norway that would echo across the entire North Sea. The continental shelf there is a vast, sloping plain of accumulated sediment, and on that day, a section of it simply gave way. This was the slide, a catastrophic underwater landslide on a scale that defies easy comprehension. An area of seabed roughly the size of Scotland broke free and slid into the deep ocean abyss. The movement of that much material, that quickly, displaced a colossal volume of water. In an instant, the sea itself recoiled, then rushed back with apocalyptic force, generating a tsunami that radiated outward across the open water. For the remaining communities clinging to dwindling coasts and islands, the ocean they relied upon would have transformed into a towering wall of destruction. The evidence for this cataclysm is written in the mud, a stark, sandy line cutting through the layers of finer silt and peat. Scientists taking core samples from the floors of lakes and bogs all around the North Sea basin, even far inland in Scotland and Norway, find this same distinct signature. It is a sudden deposit of coarse sand and tiny shell fragments, material that belongs on a beach, not settled at the bottom of a lake. This layer tells a clear story. A powerful surge of seawater swept far across the landscape, carrying with it and dumping it inland. By mapping where this sand layer appears and how thick it is, researchers can trace the tsunami's reach. The findings are sobering. The wave did not just kiss the shoreline, it penetrated deep into what remained of. Modern computer simulations help us visualize the scale of the disaster. As the tsunami raced across the relatively shallow North Sea, its energy compressed, forcing the water upward. By the time it reached the low-lying plains and marshlands of Central, models suggest it could have been a wall of water over 5 meters high, perhaps even taller in certain inlets and river valleys. To put that in human terms, picture a surge as high as a 2-story house, moving with the speed and relentless force of a freight train, sweeping across a landscape that offered no high ground for escape. For the people living there, the event would have been both incomprehensible and total. Fishing camps, seasonal settlements, and any communities along the coasts or rivers would have been obliterated in minutes. The wave would have scoured the land, drowning wildlife, uprooting forests and sources essential for survival. The tsunami was more than a single day of tragedy, it was a geographical turning point. The immense power of the wave would have dramatically reshaped the coastline of what little dry land remained. It likely washed away entire barrier islands, carved new channels through peat bogs, and sediments to create barren, sandy wastelands where fertile marshes once existed. For survivors, the world they knew would have been unrecognizable the next morning, their hunting grounds destroyed, their sources poisoned by salt, and the very shape of their homeland altered forever. This event did not drown by itself. The slow rise of sea level continued its work. But the tsunami delivered a shattering blow to a civilization already under immense environmental pressure. It may have rendered the central heartlands of uninhabitable, accelerating the final retreat of its people to the higher grounds of present-day Britain and mainland Europe. The memory of such a world-ending flood, passed down through hundreds of generations by word of mouth, may have taken root in the collective stories of those who fled. Evolving into the great flood myths found in cultures all around the world, the true heart of a civilization is found not in its tools, but in its homes. While we have the harpoons they threw and the forests they walked, the most intimate connection to the people of would be to stand where they lived. Finding a submerged settlement on the floor of the North Sea is perhaps the greatest challenge in underwater archaeology, a search for a needle in a haystack the size of a country. Yet, scientists are not searching blindly. they are following a trail of ancient leftovers. High-resolution seismic scans of the seabed have begun to reveal subtle, mysterious anomalies. In certain areas, the data shows unusual mounds or concentrated layers of material that stand out from the surrounding silt and sand. Researchers believe these could be middens, the accumulated refuse of a community over many generations. In an archaeological context, a midden is not just trash, it is a time capsule. A concentrated layer of shells, animal bones, broken tools, and charcoal from ancient hearths would be a direct record of daily meals, crafting activities, and resource use. Finding one on the seabed would be a landmark discovery, physically anchoring a human community to a specific, identifiable point on that ghostly map. We get a powerful glimpse of what such a settlement might contain from a different, neighboring sea. In the cold, brackish waters of the Baltic, where low salinity and fine sediments create extraordinary preservation conditions, divers have made breathtaking finds from the same Mesolithic period. They have discovered entire landscapes of wooden artifacts, things that normally rot away in a matter of centuries. These include intricately woven fish traps, long wooden fencing systems designed to herd fish into enclosures, and even stationary platforms built along ancient shorelines. These are not the possessions of nomadic hunters passing through. They are the infrastructure of a people who understood their environment deeply and invested labor in managing it for the long term. A wooden fish trap is a statement of intent. It represents planning, cooperation, and a sophisticated knowledge of fish migration patterns and local hydrology. It suggests that these communities were not merely surviving from day to day, but were establishing a sustained, strategic relationship with their rich aquatic world. If such delicate wooden structures survived in the Baltic, it is a compelling clue that similar, or even more complex, settlements could be preserved in the silts of, waiting for our technology to find them. The ongoing search for a settlement site is the holy grail of this field. To find the of a dwelling, the outline of a hut, or the central hearth of a family home would transform our understanding. It would move us from imagining abstract communities to reconstructing specific lives. We could learn about their social structure, their division of labor, how they organized their living space, and perhaps even uncover artistic expressions or ceremonial items. Each piece of flint from a trawler's net is a sentence in this story, but a settlement would be an entire chapter. The seabed holds that promise, a potential Pompeii of the Stone Age, frozen not by ash, but by silt and a rapid rise of water, preserving a single moment in the long, resilient history of a people who thrived until their world literally slipped beneath the waves. The sea did not take in a day. Its final disappearance was a slow, inexorable transformation, a process measured not in years but in. As the global climate continued to warm, the great ice sheets melted, pouring fresh water back into the world's oceans. The rate of this rise was steady, averaging about 1 to 2 meters every century. While that may sound gradual, within the span of a human lifetime it was a change you could witness. A child might play on a beach that, by the time they were grandparents, had vanished completely, replaced by encroaching. The landscape did not simply flood, it changed character in stages, like a slow-motion metamorphosis. The low-lying plains, once rich with game and forests, were the first to go. As seawater seeped inland, these areas transformed into vast wetlands, brackish marshes, and lagoons. This was a subtle shift, turning solid ground into a soggy, transitional world. These wetlands would have been rich in birdlife and fish, offering new resources even as they swallowed the old hunting grounds. For generations, people likely adapted, learning to harvest reeds, trap waterfowl, and navigate these new, shallow waterways with their boats, but the sea was relentless. The marshes themselves eventually gave way, becoming open, shallow sea. The higher grounds, the hills and plateaus, became islands in a growing archipelago. One of the last holdouts was likely the area we now call the Dogger Bank, a vast sandbank in the middle of the North Sea that was once an elevated plateau. For centuries, it may have persisted as a cluster of islands, a final refuge in a shrinking world. We can trace this final chapter through sediment cores, which show a clear transition from peat to brackish marsh mud, and finally to the sandy, shell-filled sediments of the open seabed. The last of these islands likely slipped beneath the waves around 7,000 years ago. For the people whose ancestry was rooted in that land, this was not a sudden catastrophe, but a continuous, generational retreat. They were forced to migrate, season by season, decade by decade, following the receding coastline toward the higher ground of what is now Britain and the mainland European coast. This slow-motion exodus would have profoundly shaped the population patterns of Neolithic Europe, as new arrivals brought their stories, technologies, and memories of a drowned homeland. The loss of was not an event with a single date, but a long farewell, a world dissolving at the edges until the last hilltop disappeared beneath the waves, leaving only the whisper of its story in the deep. The story of is not only buried in mud, it may be woven into us. As the waters rose, the people did not simply vanish, they migrated, carrying their lives and lineages to new shores. Modern science now offers a way to trace that ancient journey through a biological archive, our own DNA. Analysis of genetic material from ancient human remains found across Europe is creating a dynamic map of prehistoric population movements. While researchers have yet to recover direct genetic evidence from a burial site, the patterns they see tell a compelling story. The data strongly suggests that after the last ice age, the British Isles were repopulated by groups traveling from the European mainland. And the most logical, most direct path for that migration was across the vast, fertile plains of. This land bridge was not just a feature on a map. It was a bustling highway of human movement for thousands of years. Families, hunters, and entire communities would have traversed its rivers and forests, moving between the continent and the land that would become an island. Each generation that made that journey left a trace in the genetic code of their descendants. This means the people who fished its lagoons and hunted its forests likely contributed directly to the genetic tapestry of modern populations in Britain, Ireland, and coastal regions of Europe. Their DNA, mixed and passed down over hundreds of generations, is a living relic of that lost world. This genetic evidence fundamentally changes our perspective, transforms from a fascinating geological footnote into a vital, pulsating corridor in the early human story of Europe. It was a cradle, a connector, and ultimately a crucible that shaped the demographic landscape of an entire continent. The harpoons and tree stumps show us where they lived, but the DNA hints at where they went and who they became. This biological legacy makes the search for their physical remains one of the most poignant quests in archaeology, a chance to finally put a face and a name to the ghostly population of a sunken continent. Their beliefs are the most elusive ghost in this drowned landscape. Without written words or surviving monuments, the inner world of people seems forever lost to the deep. Yet their cultural echoes resonate from the dry lands that once bordered their own. Across the connected continent of Mesolithic Europe, we find glimpses of a rich symbolic life that they almost certainly shared. In what is now Denmark, archaeologists have uncovered small, exquisitely carved figurines of elk and other animals, crafted from amber. These were not tools for survival, but objects of meaning, perhaps used in storytelling, as talismans for a successful hunt, or as representations of guiding spirits. The care invested in their creation speaks of a culture that saw the world as more than just a source of food. It was a place alive with significance. This symbolic thinking extended to how they treated their community members after their passing. At burial sites from this era in Britain and Scandinavia, we find individuals laid to rest with a careful, deliberate reverence. The use of red, a vibrant earthy pigment, is common, often sprinkled over the resting place. This practice, found across the ancient world, is widely interpreted as having spiritual or symbolic weight, possibly representing life, blood, or a journey to another realm. Personal items were sometimes placed alongside the individual, simple but meaningful objects like finely crafted flint blades or ornaments made from animal teeth. These are not random acts. They suggest a belief in an existence beyond the physical world, a sense of continuity that honored the individual's place within the community and the landscape they knew. For the people of that landscape was the very fabric of their identity. Their myths and oral traditions would not have been abstract tales, but living maps of memory and meaning. A particular oddly shaped hill on the horizon might have been the resting place of a great ancestor. A specific bend in a powerful river could have been the site where the salmon spirit first gave itself to the people. The vast, ancient oak in the forest might have been the world tree, connecting the earth to the sky. Their entire cosmology, their understanding of how the world worked and their role within it, was woven into the topography of their homeland. Every landmark was a chapter, every animal a character in a story passed down across generations around the warmth of a fire. This makes the drowning of a cultural catastrophe of unimaginable depth. It was not merely the loss of hunting grounds, it was the utter annihilation of a sacred geography. As the sea swallowed those hills, silenced those rivers, and drowned those forests, it erased the physical anchors for an entire belief system. The places where rituals were performed, where origin stories were set, where the bones of ancestors lay, all vanished beneath the salt water. The survivors, forced to migrate to the unfamiliar coasts of Britain and Europe, carried with them the stories, but the places those stories belonged to were gone forever. This profound rupture may have fundamentally reshaped their worldview, forcing old stories to adapt to new landscapes, or fading into half-remembered legends of a time when the world was wider and different. The silence from the seabed is not just an absence of artifacts. It is the quiet after the last echo of their songs has faded away. The bones pulled from the seabed tell a story of giants. Alongside the flint tools and harpoons, trawlers have hauled up an astonishing of remains from a lost animal kingdom. These are not the bones of modern creatures, but the massive, fossilized remnants of species that vanished from Europe long ago. Each femur or tusk is a direct line to the ecosystem that sustained, revealing a world where humans walked alongside the most magnificent beasts of the Ice Age. The list reads like a roll call of prehistoric legends: woolly mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, the towering giant elk with antlers spanning over 3 meters, and the powerful cave lion. A predator larger than any lion alive today. This was not a barren plain, but a thriving paradise for what scientists call megafauna, the great animals of a bygone era. Their presence paints a vivid picture of the environment. The woolly mammoth and rhino, with their thick coats and specialized teeth for grazing tough grasses, tell us that open, cold steppes persisted in parts of even as forests advanced. The aurochs, the massive, wild ancestor of all domestic cattle, required vast, nutrient-rich grasslands to sustain its herds. Finding their bones confirms that the landscape offered immense grazing opportunities, a verdant savanna that could support such large, hungry populations. For the human inhabitants, these animals represented the ultimate resource and the ultimate challenge. The relationship was one of profound interdependence and constant negotiation. These creatures were certainly hunted, providing an unparalleled source of meat, hide, bone, and ivory. A single successful mammoth hunt could sustain a community for months, its tusks providing material for tools and perhaps art, its thick hide offering shelter and warmth. But to reduce them to mere prey misses the deeper cultural dimension. Living in such close proximity to animals of such staggering size and power would have shaped the human imagination in fundamental ways. It is easy to envision these creatures occupying a central place in myth and oral tradition, perhaps seen as embodiments of the land's raw spirit or as ancestral beings. The cave lion, a top predator, would have been both a mortal danger and a symbol of supreme strength, possibly inspiring tales of heroic confrontations or serving as a spiritual guide for hunters. This coexistence was also a delicate balance of competition. Humans and large carnivores like the cave lion and packs of wolves would have vied for the same herbivores, creating a complex web of rivalry and caution. The disappearance of did not just erase a human homeland, it wrote the final chapter for many of these magnificent species in Europe. As the sea rose, it fragmented the once vast, connected grasslands and forests into shrinking islands. These isolated pockets of habitat could not support the large populations needed for genetic health, and the animals that relied on them found their world literally dissolving. The loss of this continent was a death knell for the last surviving populations of creatures like the woolly mammoth in this region, closing the book on an age where giants roamed a land that now sleeps beneath the waves. Their technological genius was carved from stone, bone, and wood. In a world without metal, the people have refined a sophisticated and versatile toolkit, one perfectly adapted to the resources around them. At the heart of this technology was a revolutionary concept, the microlith. These were not large, handheld axes, but tiny, razor-sharp blades of flint, each no bigger than a thumbnail. The real innovation was not in the blade itself, but in how it was used. A craftsman would carefully slot several of these microliths into a groove along the edge of a wooden shaft or a bone handle, securing them with sticky plant resin and sinew. The result was a composite tool, a weapon far greater than the sum of its parts. A single wooden arrow could be armed with a lethal cutting edge many centimeters long, created from multiple small, replaceable stones. If one microlith broke, you could simply pop it out and slot in a new one, a Stone Age version of modular design. This microlithic technology was the key to their survival. It allowed for the creation of lightweight, deadly projectiles for hunting forest game, efficient knives for butchering and crafting, and sturdy spear points for fishing or defense. It represented a profound understanding of material science, maximizing the cutting potential of scarce, high-quality flint by using it in the most economical way possible. But their mastery extended far beyond stone. From the animals they hunted, they utilized every part with remarkable skill. Antler, a tough yet workable material, was shaped into barbed harpoon points designed to hold fast in a large fish or sea mammal. Bone was carefully ground and polished into sharp fish hooks and delicate, eyed needles. The existence of these needles is a quiet revelation. It tells us they were sewing, likely using sinew or plant fibers to stitch together hides into tailored clothing, blankets, or even the skins for shelters and boats. And boats were almost certainly central to their way of life. In a landscape increasingly defined by water, mobility was survival. Evidence from similar cultures across Europe strongly suggests they crafted dugout canoes, laboriously hollowing out a single large tree trunk with fire and stone adzes. These vessels transformed their world. A canoe turned a river from a barrier into a highway, allowing for efficient travel, transport of goods, and access to deepwater fishing grounds far from shore. It enabled them to follow migratory fish, to visit distant communities for trade or social gatherings, and to eventually navigate their retreat as the seas rose. This entire technological suite speaks of a deep, intimate intelligence. It was not about dominating their environment, but about listening to it and learning its language. They understood which wood was buoyant and straight-grained for a canoe, which antler retained flexibility, and how to coax a razor's edge from a stubborn piece of flint. Their tools were an extension of their profound environmental knowledge, honed over thousands of years of observation and experimentation. This adaptability was their greatest strength, the reason they could thrive for so long in a world that was, quite literally, dissolving around them. Their legacy is not in grand monuments, but in the elegant logic of a bone hook and the quiet ingenuity of a stone no larger than a coin. The slow drowning of their world was a crisis measured in generations. As the sea claimed more land each year, the people have faced a profound and relentless challenge, becoming some of the earliest climate refugees in the human story. Their response was not a single dramatic exodus, but a continuous generational retreat. Families and entire communities would have been forced to make agonizing decisions, packing what they could carry and abandoning places that held the memories and stories of their ancestors. They moved toward the high ground, the land that would not drown. Some journeyed westward, following the receding coastline until they reached the chalk cliffs and wooded hills of what is now Britain. Others moved eastward, onto the rising lands of the European mainland that today form the Netherlands, Denmark, and northern Germany. This was not a planned migration, but a desperate, adaptive scattering before an advancing tide. This movement of people reshaped the social landscape of prehistoric Europe. Different groups, each with their own traditions and knowledge shaped by life in its unique environment, were suddenly pushed into closer contact with established populations in these new territories. Such encounters are never simple. They can spark incredible cultural exchange, as new ideas about tool-making, boat design, or spiritual beliefs are shared around a communal fire. But they can also create tension and conflict, as newcomers and residents compete for the same vital resources, prime hunting grounds, springs, and sheltered campsites. The arrival of skilled, adaptable communities would have intensified this competition, placing new pressures on the carrying capacity of the land. This pressure may have been a catalyst for profound change. For the people of this era lived as hunter-gatherers, a way of life perfectly suited to the vast, resource-rich plains of their drowned homeland. But in the more confined and already populated landscapes of Neolithic Britain and Europe, that mobile lifestyle became harder to sustain. The need for reliable food sources in a crowded world could have made the alternative more attractive: the deliberate cultivation of plants and the management of animals. While the shift to agriculture was a complex process driven by many factors, the displacement of people likely played a role. Their migration added demographic pressure at a critical time, potentially accelerating a social revolution that would forever change humanity's relationship with the land. From one of following its bounty to one of controlling its production. Ultimately, the story of these people is not one of defeat, but of extraordinary resilience. For thousands of years, they adapted to a warming climate, to shifting forests, and to changing animal migrations. When their world began to vanish beneath the sea, they adapted once more, carrying their skills, their stories, and their lineage to new shores. They did not disappear, they transformed. Their legacy is written in the genetic history of modern populations and in the cultural foundations of Europe. They embody a fundamental human truth. Our greatest strength has always been our ability to adapt, to find a path forward even when the familiar world is literally washed away. This enduring spirit of adaptation connects their ancient struggle directly to our modern moment, raising urgent questions about the legacy we are creating for those who will come after us. Mapping a ghost continent requires navigating a world of perpetual night. The modern exploration of is underwater archaeology's most formidable frontier, a mission conducted in an environment hostile to both humans and history. The North Sea is no tranquil lagoon. It is a cold, shadowy realm of powerful currents and swirling sediments that can reduce visibility to mere inches in an instant. The very forces that drowned this land now guard its secrets, making traditional excavation nearly impossible. To overcome this, scientists have turned to a fleet of robotic explorers. Remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, are tethered machines piloted from ships on the surface, equipped with powerful lights, high-definition cameras, and delicate manipulator arms that can carefully retrieve an artifact from the silt. Alongside them glide autonomous underwater vehicles, UVs, which are essentially underwater drones programmed to fly precise grid patterns over the seabed. Mapping vast areas with sonar that paints a three-dimensional picture of the bottom topography. This technology allows researchers to see through the murk, identifying anomalies that could be anything from a submerged riverbank to a collection of ancient bones. Yet even with these tools, the work is extraordinarily complex and costly. A single day on a research vessel equipped with this technology can cost tens of thousands of dollars, requiring perfect coordination between archaeologists, marine geologists, and oceanographers. The logistics are a monumental puzzle, dependent on brief windows of good weather in one of the world's most unpredictable seas. This immense challenge has forged unusual and essential alliances. Archaeologists now routinely collaborate with sectors that have long worked in these waters. Commercial fishing trawlers, whose nets first revealed its existence, provide invaluable local knowledge about seabed conditions and strange snags. Even more critically, the offshore oil and gas industry shares a treasure trove of previously collected seismic data, detailed scans of the seabed substrate that can hint at buried archaeological sites. This cross-pollination of expertise is what makes progress possible, turning industrial data into historical insight. Every new survey campaign is a leap into the unknown, holding the potential for a discovery that could rewrite chapters of our prehistoric past. The goal is to move from mapping landscapes to pinpointing a single, preserved campsite, a place where the story paused. Finding that would be like turning a page in a book thought forever lost, offering a direct line to the daily rhythms, the social structures, and the intimate lives of a civilization that watched its world disappear. This relentless search in the dark, cold depths is more than technical achievement. It is a profound act of recovery, pulling fragile echoes of human resilience back into the light. But the story of this sunken world does not end with science. Beneath the waves lies another modern frontier, a complex web of law and national interest. The North Sea floor is not a blank, open space. It is a meticulously mapped political landscape, divided among several nations. The United Kingdom, Norway, Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands all hold sovereign rights to different sections of the seabed, each governed by its own distinct laws regarding underwater cultural heritage. This creates a fascinating and often challenging situation. An artifact resting in the mud might lie in British waters, while the ancient river system it came from may have originated in an area now under Dutch jurisdiction. So who gets to tell its story? International agreements, like the important UNESCO Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage, provide a framework of principles. They advocate for preservation in place, responsible scientific study, and the idea that this heritage belongs to all humanity, not just to the nation closest to it. Yet turning these noble principles into practice on the dark, stormy floor of the North Sea is an immense challenge. Enforcement is difficult, and the sheer cost and technical complexity of exploration mean that cooperation is not just ideal, it is essential. The question of who owns the past becomes very real when a trawler's net hauls up a 10,000-year-old tool. Does it belong to the fisherman, to the country whose waters it was found in? Or does it represent a shared human legacy that transcends modern borders? This is the modern puzzle that must be solved to unlock secrets responsibly. The future of this lost civilization depends on a delicate balance, one that respects national sovereignty while fostering international collaboration among scientists, governments, and even industries that work in these waters. It is a reminder that our quest to understand a prehistoric world is irrevocably tied to the diplomatic and legal realities of our own. The deepest stories are not written on paper, but whispered across centuries. While science maps the physical remains of, another kind of evidence may linger in the oldest tales of coastal Europe. Scattered along the Atlantic fringe, from Wales to Brittany, are haunting legends of lands swallowed by the sea. In Welsh tradition, there is the Lowland Hundred, a fertile kingdom said to lie beneath the waters of Cardigan Bay, lost when a negligent keeper failed to close a protective dike. From Brittany comes the story of the sunken city of, a place of grandeur drowned by a rising tide after a princess, often named, made a fateful mistake. On the surface, these are medieval folklore, moral fables about human error and divine punishment. Yet their emotional core is something older, a profound and pervasive fear of the hungry ocean. Folklorists and historians note that such stories are rarely found inland. They cling specifically to coastal communities whose identity is forged by the sea's dual nature as provider and destroyer. This geographical pattern is a clue. These myths could be narrative vessels, carrying a seed of memory from a time when the coastline was not a fixed line, but a relentless, advancing frontier. The written versions we have today are like a final draft of a story told around countless fires, each generation adapting the details to fit their own landscape and beliefs. The original event, the traumatic loss of habitable land, could have been a real and repeated experience for post-ice age communities. As sea levels rose for thousands of years, every generation might have heard from their elders about a fishing ground that vanished, a forest that became a lagoon, or a sacred hill that turned into an island and then disappeared entirely. Over these shared experiences of loss could have crystallized into an archetypal story, a cautionary tale about a once great place now lying silent beneath the waves. The specific details of a forgotten dike or a magical key are likely later embellishments, narrative anchors added to make an ancient, formless anxiety tangible for a new audience. We can never prove a direct lineage from the drowning of to the legend of. The chain of oral transmission is too long and too tangled, but the possibility is profoundly meaningful. It suggests that the cataclysm was not just a geological or archaeological event, but a psychological and cultural one, so immense its reverberations might have shaped the mythic imagination of an entire continent. This blending of sediment core and story reminds us that history is recorded in more than one way. It lives in the layers of the earth and in the layers of a tale, both preserving the echo of a world that was lost. The seabed of the North Sea is not a silent museum. It is a bustling industrial zone. This presents a profound modern dilemma. How do we honor a 10,000-year-old past while powering our present? The waters above are among the most economically vital in the world, crisscrossed by shipping lanes, swept by fishing trawlers, and increasingly dotted with the towering foundations of offshore wind farms. Beneath them, the oil and gas industry has laid a sprawling network of pipelines and platforms, their legs driven deep into the very sediments that hold archaeological secrets. Every anchor dropped, every trench dug for a cable, every new turbine foundation installed churns the. While these activities have accidentally revealed incredible finds, like that first harpoon, they also carry the risk of obliterating undisturbed sites before they can ever be studied. An ancient hearth or a carefully placed burial could be scattered by dredging, its context lost forever. The central challenge is one of balance, finding a way for green energy and cultural heritage to coexist on the same patch of drowned earth. Remarkably, this challenge is fostering unexpected and innovative partnerships. Forward-thinking energy companies are now working directly with archaeologists. Before construction begins on a new wind farm, developers often fund detailed seabed surveys that use the same high-resolution sonar and magnetometry tools scientists employ. They share vast libraries of geological data originally collected to find stable ground for turbines, data that can reveal the subtle contours of a prehistoric river valley or a suspicious mound. In some cases, companies even underwrite targeted archaeological dives or sediment sampling in high-potential zones. This proactive cooperation transforms industrial necessity into scientific opportunity. It represents a vital shift in mindset, recognizing that the story of is a renewable resource just as precious as the ones we extract. By weaving archaeology into the planning process, we can steer development away from sensitive areas and rescue knowledge from the path of progress. This collaborative model is our best hope for ensuring that the final chapters of this lost civilization are carefully read, not erased by the very industries that first hinted at its existence. The future of this ancient world now depends on a modern covenant between commerce and conservation, a shared understanding that the ground beneath the waves holds value far beyond the tangible. The next chapter of this story will be written by technologies that can see the invisible. While tools and bones tell us what people made, new methods are emerging to reveal where they simply were. One of the most promising is environmental DNA analysis. Imagine taking a core sample of that deep, ancient silt, and instead of just looking for pollen, searching for microscopic genetic fragments. Every living thing sheds traces of its DNA through skin cells, hair, or waste into its surroundings. In the oxygen-starved conditions of the seabed, these fragile genetic blueprints can survive for. By carefully screening sediment cores, scientists could potentially detect the ghostly signature of a human presence, or the specific animals they lived alongside, even if not a single artifact was found in that spot. It is a way of listening for whispers in the mud. Alongside this biological detective work, our vision of the seabed is getting sharper. Advances in marine seismic technology are pushing toward ultra-high-resolution imaging. Future surveys may be able to distinguish not just the shape of a buried river channel, but the subtle outline of a collapsed wooden post, the pattern of stones from a hearth, or the organized scatter of a tool-making site. This would allow archaeologists to map suspected settlements with incredible precision before a single dive takes place, turning a blind search into a targeted investigation. The goal is to create a three-dimensional archaeological map of the entire drowned landscape, identifying high-priority sites for future exploration. To achieve this, many researchers are calling for something bold, a coordinated international mission dedicated solely to. They envision a collaborative effort on the scale of a space exploration program, bringing together scientists, engineers, and funding from all the North Sea nations. Such a project could deploy the next generation of robotic vehicles and sensor arrays for sustained, systematic study, moving beyond scattered surveys to a comprehensive understanding. This shared endeavor would recognize that this lost land is a common heritage, a piece of human prehistory that belongs to no single modern country but to everyone. The ultimate hope, the dream that drives this entire field, is the discovery of an intact settlement. Researchers speak of finding a Stone Age Pompeii, not preserved in volcanic ash, but in the deep, cold, oxygen-free mud of the. In such anaerobic conditions, organic materials that would normally decay in centuries can survive for thousands of years. We could find wooden dwellings with their posts still standing, woven baskets, leather items, even food remains. A single site like this, frozen in a moment of time, would revolutionize our understanding of Mesolithic life. It would tell us how they organized their homes, what they ate on a daily basis, how they crafted objects from perishable materials, and perhaps even offer clues about their social structure and beliefs. This is the powerful allure lying beneath the waves, the chance for a direct, intimate conversation with our deepest past. Each new core sample, each sonar scan, brings us closer to a moment of profound connection, where the ghost continent finally reveals the people who called it home. The story of is ultimately a story about us. This lost world is far more than a fascinating archaeological mystery. It is a 10,000-year-old mirror reflecting challenges we recognize all too clearly today. At its core, this sunken continent is one of humanity's oldest and most complete records of adapting to a changing climate. For generations, its inhabitants adjusted to warming temperatures, shifting forests, and new animal migrations. They watched their coastline retreat year after year, a slow-motion crisis that demanded constant innovation and, ultimately, a painful migration. Their experience is a powerful, long-term case study in resilience, but also a sobering reminder of the profound vulnerability of communities built on low-lying land. In an era where global sea levels are rising once again, threatening coastal cities and island nations, the ghost of speaks directly to our present moment. It demonstrates that environmental change is not a future abstraction, but a force that has shaped human destiny capable of redrawing the map of civilization itself. This understanding rewrites the cultural history of an entire region. For a long time, the early human story of places like Britain was seen as a series of separate arrivals by sea, changes that narrative completely. It reveals that Britain was not an isolated island, but the western frontier of a vast, inhabited continent. The people who walked there were not intrepid sailors crossing a dangerous channel. They were simply following the game through familiar forests and across gentle rivers. This land bridge was a bustling corridor of life, trade, and movement for thousands of years. Its existence means the roots of human occupation in northern Europe are far deeper and more continuous than we once thought. The cultures that later built Stonehenge or crafted magnificent metalwork did not emerge from a vacuum. They carried within them the legacy of those who thrived on the plains now beneath the North Sea. Discovering fills a massive blank page in our collective history book, connecting disparate chapters into a single, epic saga of human presence. Perhaps the most profound impact of this discovery is the perspective it offers. Geology operates on a timescale that dwarfs human history and forces us to confront that scale. Our civilizations, with all their monuments and empires, are fleeting events in the long story of the Earth. Continents can drown, coastlines can vanish, and entire ways of life can be transformed by forces beyond any king's command or any army's control. This is not a message of despair, but one of connection and humility. It ties us to a past that is both incredibly distant and eerily familiar. We share with those Mesolithic hunters the same fundamental needs for shelter, community, and meaning. We share their capacity for brilliant adaptation in the face of change. By listening to the echoes from their drowned world, we gain a deeper appreciation for the incredible journey of our species, a journey marked not by permanence, but by continuous, courageous adaptation to an ever-changing planet. Their story, recovered from the silent dark, ultimately helps us understand our own. Interpreting this silent archive requires a special kind of listening. The evidence from does not arrive as a complete story, but as scattered fragments, a handful of puzzle pieces salvaged from a box whose lid was lost ago. To make sense of it, archaeologists have built a methodology that is inherently interdisciplinary, a conversation between many different fields of science. Their task is to reconstruct a plausible narrative from whispers, and they do it by connecting dots across vast distances of both space and time. The first step is correlation. A single bone harpoon point pulled from the fishing grounds means little on its own. But when researchers take that artifact and compare it to nearly identical harpoons found in carefully excavated sites on dry land in Denmark or England, a connection sparks. They can date those terrestrial finds using precise methods, which gives a reliable age for the similar object from the sea. Furthermore, the geological data from seabed cores, which tells us the environment was a lagoon 8,000 years ago, perfectly explains why a harpoon for hunting aquatic prey would be there. Each piece of evidence validates and contextualizes the others, building a web of probability where a single clue can anchor an entire scenario. Another vital tool is experimental archaeology. To truly understand the people of, some researchers literally try to walk in their footsteps. They will take a piece of flint and, using only other stones and antler tools, attempt to nap a replica of a microlith. This hands-on process reveals the immense skill and knowledge required, the specific angles of force, and the learning curve involved. Others might haft a replica harpoon onto a shaft with pine resin and sinew, then test its effectiveness in water, learning about its flight, penetration, and how the barbs function. These experiments move beyond speculation, providing tangible data on how long it took to make a tool, how it was likely used, and why certain designs were superior. It transforms anonymous artifacts into extensions of living, problem-solving minds. Since no written records exist, researchers also look to living analogies. They study the social structures, mobility patterns, and spiritual beliefs of documented hunter-gatherer societies from recent history, such as certain indigenous groups in the Americas or communities in the. The goal is not to copy one culture onto another, but to understand the range of possibilities. If we know that many mobile forager groups share certain traits, like seasonal gathering places, complex kinship networks, and deep ecological knowledge, it becomes reasonable to infer that the people of facing similar environmental challenges may have developed comparable social solutions. This ethnographic window offers a framework for interpreting the silent archaeological record, suggesting how scattered seasonal camps might have been connected into a larger social world. Finally, powerful computer modeling synthesizes all this information. Scientists can input the known data, the rising sea levels from core samples, the topography from seismic maps, and the likely resource locations to create dynamic simulations. These models can test hypotheses, showing how a community might have migrated seasonally across the ancient landscape, or how quickly a tsunami would have inundated a particular valley. They can visualize the slow transformation of a forested plain into an island archipelago over centuries, providing a visceral sense of the changing world these people navigated. This holistic approach, weaving together geology, experimentation, anthropology, and digital simulation, is how stories are built from silence. It is a meticulous, collaborative process of reasoning, ensuring that the compelling narrative of a lost civilization rests not on fantasy, but on a solid, interconnected foundation of evidence. Each tiny flint blade becomes a point of light, and by patiently connecting them, researchers slowly trace the constellation of a forgotten world. The most important discoveries often come from the most unexpected places. While research vessels and robotic probes map the seabed, the first alert to a new find still frequently arrives in a fisherman's net. These men and women, who know the moods and contours of the North Sea like the back of their hand, are invaluable partners in this search. For generations, they hauled up curiosities without knowing their true significance. Today, that dynamic has transformed into a formal, vital collaboration. Across the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, museums and universities run specific outreach programs aimed directly at the fishing community. They provide simple identification guides, clear points of contact, and assurances that donating an unusual object will not disrupt their work. The goal is to turn every trawler into a sentinel. When a fisherman carefully sets aside a strangely worked piece of bone or a perfectly shaped flint and reports its location, they are providing a crucial data point. That single artifact, with its approximate find spot, can direct $1 million scientific survey to a promising new area of the seabed. It is a perfect synergy, the deep, localized knowledge of the people who work the water meeting the analytical power of modern archaeology. This spirit of collaboration extends beneath the surface as well. In the clearer, shallower waters of the southern North Sea, and the Baltic recreational divers are being enlisted as citizen scientists. Through training programs organized by heritage agencies, these enthusiasts learn to distinguish a natural stone from a human-crafted tool, or to identify the dark, waterlogged timbers of a prehistoric fish trap. They are taught not to touch or move anything, but to carefully note its location, take photographs, and report their find to archaeologists. This transforms a leisure activity into a mission of discovery. Each dive becomes a potential survey, with thousands of trained eyes scanning the seabed in places researchers could never afford to constantly monitor. A diver might spot a cluster of antler fragments settled in a depression, or notice a strange alignment of stones that suggests a human hand. These reports create a living map of scattered clues, helping to piece together the puzzle of where people once lived and worked along lost coastlines. This participatory model has revolutionized the scale of the search. It acknowledges a fundamental truth: the North Sea is simply too vast, and research budgets too limited, for scientists to cover every square mile alone. By engaging the communities whose lives are intertwined with these waters, archaeology vastly expands its reach. Every fishing boat and every dive boat becomes an extension of the laboratory. This turns the entire sea into a living, collaborative archaeological site, where discovery is a shared endeavor between academics and the public. It democratizes the process of uncovering history, creating a powerful sense of shared stewardship. A fisherman who donates a harpoon point or a diver who reports a submerged forest stump is no longer just an observer of the past. They become an active contributor to its recovery. This partnership ensures that the story of is not just studied by a few, but guarded and revealed by the many who call its waters home today. The story of a sunken continent is not a solitary tale. Its ghostly plains are echoed on continental shelves across the globe, each one a lost chapter in the human journey. When sea levels were at their lowest, the map of our world looked dramatically different. Great swathes of what is now shallow sea were exposed, creating vast, habitable landscapes that served as bridges, highways, and homelands for our ancestors. By placing alongside these other drowned worlds, we see it not as a regional mystery, but as part of a profound global pattern of dispersal and adaptation. Far to the northeast, another legendary land bridge once connected continents. This was Beringia, a wide, grassy plain that linked Siberia to Alaska during the last ice age. For thousands of years, it was not a frigid barrier but a fertile refuge, teeming with life. This was the gateway, the route through which the first human populations likely entered the Americas. Like Beringia was not merely a barren corridor, but a stable environment where people could live for generations, adapting to its unique conditions before moving onward into new continents. Its eventual flooding created the Bering Strait, severing the connection and leaving its story beneath the waves, a parallel narrative of a lost stepping stone in human migration. Half a world away in Southeast Asia, an even more immense submerged landscape awaits discovery. During the last glacial period, the islands of Indonesia, Borneo, and Java were not islands at all. They were the high points of a vast, low-lying continental shelf called. This was a tropical supercontinent, nearly twice the size of India, covered in rainforests and savannas. It was a crucible of biodiversity, and almost certainly a critical arena for early human development and migration throughout the region. As the seas rose, fragmented into the thousands of islands we see today, isolating populations and creating the incredibly complex cultural and genetic tapestry of island Southeast Asia. Its drowning was a geographical event that reshaped an entire part of the world. Perhaps the most evocative parallel lies in the Middle East. Today's Persian Gulf is a shallow, salty sea, but during the last ice age, it was a fertile basin watered by the Tigris, Euphrates, and numerous other rivers. Researchers call this the Persian Gulf Oasis, a lush, habitable refuge surrounded by deserts. This oasis would have been a magnet for human and animal populations during dry periods, a potential cradle for early settlements and cultural exchange. Then, as glaciers melted, the Indian Ocean rose and rushed in through the Strait of Hormuz in a dramatic marine transgression. This event likely displaced communities, forcing them into the surrounding river valleys, where some scholars suggest the concentrated populations and shared trauma may have helped catalyze the later development of Mesopotamian civilization. It is a powerful reminder that drowning lands did not just erase history, they sometimes pushed it in new, unexpected directions. Seeing within this global framework reveals universal themes. Each of these landscapes provided rich resources that supported human life form. Each one served as a connector, facilitating the movement of people, ideas, and genes across what are now impassable water barriers. And each one ultimately succumbed to the same global force, the relentless rise of post-ice age sea levels. This comparative perspective transforms our understanding. Is no longer just Britain's lost past, it is a European example of a planetary phenomenon. Its story contributes critical data to a worldwide study of how humans spread, adapted, and were transformed by a changing climate. The tools found in its mud, the pollen in its cores, and the echoes in its seismic maps are part of a global conversation, one written in sediment and sea level, telling the epic story of humanity's ancient relationship with a shifting world. This immense potential for discovery brings a profound responsibility. As our ability to see into the deep improves, we face a difficult and necessary question: do we intervene or do we wait? The ethical dilemma surrounding is a modern one, pitting the urgent desire for knowledge against the wisdom of patience. On one hand, active excavation could rescue priceless information from the relentless forces that threaten it. The seabed is not a static museum case, it is a dynamic environment. Natural currents constantly shift sediments, eroding delicate sites over time. More pressingly, the industrial activity that helps fund discovery also poses a direct risk. A single dredging operation or pipeline trench could obliterate an undisturbed settlement before we even know it is there. In these cases, a carefully conducted archaeological dig acts as a rescue mission, salvaging artifacts and data that would otherwise be lost forever. The knowledge gained could be transformative, offering immediate answers about our shared past. Yet excavation, by its very nature, is a destructive process. Once a site is dug, its original context is gone, a unique arrangement of objects in the soil that can never be perfectly recreated. The methods we have today, while advanced, are still limited. Future technologies may offer ways to study a site without ever touching it, or to analyze materials in ways we cannot yet conceive. By choosing to preserve a site in place, we are essentially placing a bet on the ingenuity of future generations, handing them an intact time capsule to open with tools we can only dream of. This principle of stewardship argues that this heritage, which belongs to no single nation but to all of humanity, should be conserved for as long as possible. There is no simple answer here. The debate hinges on a balance between acting now to save what we can and holding back to potentially save more later. It forces us to consider our role not just as discoverers, but as caretakers of a story much larger than ourselves. Each potential site must be judged individually, weighing its vulnerability against its significance, and the irreversible act of digging against the uncertain promise of tomorrow. This thoughtful, cautious approach is how we honor the legacy of those who walked that lost land, ensuring that their story, when it is finally told, is told with the greatest care and deepest respect we can possibly offer. Data points and sediment cores can only tell us so much. To truly feel the presence of, we need to step into it, to see sunlight filtering through its long-drowned forests and hear the distant calls of its herds. This is where a unique kind of alchemy happens, where science meets art to rebuild a world from fragments. Visual artists and digital animators serve as essential translators, taking the complex data from geologists and archaeologists and weaving it into breathtaking, immersive scenes. Their work is not mere decoration, it is a critical bridge of understanding. The colored layers of a seismic scan reveal a buried river valley, but an artist can paint the water sparkling under a Paleolithic sun, with reeds bending in the breeze along its banks. A list of pollen types indicates a mixed oak forest, but an animator can show dappled light falling on the forest floor, where a family carefully gathers baskets of ripe hazelnuts in the crisp air of autumn. These reconstructions, featured in major documentaries and museum displays around the world, perform a vital function. They transform abstract information into emotional experience. It is one thing to read that aurochs, the massive wild cattle, roamed the plains. It is entirely another to watch a digital herd thunder across a golden grassland, with hunters moving in coordinated silence nearby, their composite tools at the ready. This visualization makes the past immediate and tangible. It allows us to connect not just with facts, but with moments, the quiet industry of daily life, the tense focus of a hunt, the simple wonder of a child seeing a woolly rhinoceros for the first time. This artistic interpretation requires a deep and respectful collaboration. The artists work closely with scientists, ensuring every leaf, every animal's coat pattern, and the design of every tool is informed by the latest evidence. The result is a carefully reasoned hypothesis made visible. These images and animations do more than educate. They inspire a sense of shared heritage and spark curiosity in a way a graph or a chart alone cannot. They answer the most human question we have about the past: what did it look like? By giving form to the ghost continent, artists allow us to grieve its loss and marvel at its existence. They complete the circuit between the cold, dark evidence on the seabed and the warm, beating heart of human story, ensuring the legacy of is felt, not just known. Their voices are the most haunting silence in this story. We can reconstruct their tools, map their rivers, and even trace their genetic legacy, but the actual sounds they made, the words they used to name their world, are lost forever. This is the profound linguistic mystery of, while we will never hear a conversation from its shores, linguists can follow subtle clues to speculate about the languages that might have filled its forests and camps. At the time flourished, as the last ice age loosened its grip, the human tapestry of Europe was incredibly diverse. The people living across this vast, connected continent likely spoke a variety of languages, many of which scholars group under a broad, shadowy category often called European. Think of these not as a single tongue, but as a family of ancient languages, the first human sounds to echo across post-glacial Europe. They were the linguistic bedrock of the continent. Today, these languages are entirely extinct, leaving no written records or direct descendants. Yet, like a ghostly watermark, some linguists believe faint traces might survive, hidden in plain sight. These potential echoes are found in certain place names, river names, and mountain names across Europe that do not fit into any known language family, like European or Uralic. For example, the names of many major rivers in Europe, such as the Thames, the Rhine, or the Danube, have origins that remain obscure, possibly reaching back to these very ancient linguistic layers. They could be the last fossilized words from a time when was still above water, carried by migrating people and applied to new landscapes in a new home. The story of language in Europe is one of dramatic change. A few thousand years after Sank, a new language family began to spread with remarkable speed and influence. This was Proto-European, the reconstructed ancestor of hundreds of modern languages, from English and Spanish to Hindi and Russian. The reasons for its spread are complex, tied to migrations, technological advances like wheeled vehicles, and possibly shifts in social structure. As speakers of Proto-European and its descendant languages moved across Europe, they encountered the descendants of those European communities. In many places, the old languages gradually faded, absorbed or replaced by the new. This process was likely slow and uneven, a centuries-long transition where bilingualism was common, but the ultimate result was a linguistic transformation of the continent. The drowning of itself would have been a catastrophic event for language. Imagine a close-knit community, sharing a unique vocabulary developed over to describe every feature of their homeland. They had specific words for the bend in the river where the salmon run was strongest, for the peculiar hill that looked like a sleeping bear, for the marsh reed used to weave baskets, and for the spirits they believed resided in ancient trees. Their entire cultural and environmental knowledge was encoded in that language. Then, as the sea rose, that community was fractured. Some families fled west to Britain, others east to the mainland. They were scattered among new neighbors who may have spoken entirely different tongues. In such a pressured, displaced situation, languages can vanish within a few generations. The children, needing to integrate and survive in a new social setting, might have adopted the dominant language of their new home. The old words, the specific names for places now lying beneath the waves, would have lost their practical meaning. With no homeland to return to and no landscape to anchor the vocabulary, the language of likely faded into silence, a unique way of seeing the world extinguished by the rising waters. This linguistic loss is perhaps the most complete erasure of all. We can guess at their tools and their diet, but their poetry, their jokes, their lullabies, and their names for the stars are gone without a whisper. The silence from the seabed is not just an absence of objects, but an absence of song. It reminds us that history is written not only in what is left behind, but in all that was swept away, leaving only the shape of the silence where a world once spoke. The disappearance of an entire continent may have sown the seeds for a new way of life. A compelling idea connects the drowning of to one of the most profound shifts in human history, the transition from hunting and gathering to farming. As the sea swallowed vast tracts of fertile coastal plains and rich estuaries, it did more than displace communities. It dramatically compressed the available territory for those who remained. In regions like Britain and Denmark, populations that once ranged across a wide, connected continent now found themselves confined to smaller, more crowded landscapes. The loss of abundant, diverse resources would have intensified competition for what was left, placing new strains on traditional foraging lifestyles. Imagine a community that for generations relied on seasonal migrations across open plains to follow reindeer herds. Now, those plains are gone, replaced by open ocean. The remaining forests and river valleys suddenly support more people, more families, all seeking the same nuts, berries, and game. This creates a powerful pressure, a need for reliable food sources that the natural landscape, under this new strain, could no longer guarantee with the same ease. Into this pressurized environment came new ideas, carried by the very people displaced by the rising waters. The migration from did not happen in isolation. It was part of wider movements and exchanges across a changing Europe. Some of these groups may have brought with them early knowledge of plant management or animal husbandry, concepts that were beginning to take root on the continental mainland. The convergence of displaced populations, heightened resource competition, and the exchange of new knowledge could have created a perfect catalyst. The intensive, laborious work of clearing land, sowing seeds, and tending livestock starts to look like a viable strategy when the alternative, depending solely on a stretched and shrinking natural bounty, becomes increasingly uncertain. Farming represents a fundamental trade, exchanging the mobility and varied diet of foraging for the settled security and predictable calories of cultivation. For societies facing a literal reduction of their world, that security may have become irresistibly attractive. This is not to say the drowning of single-handedly invented agriculture. The shift was a complex mosaic of causes across the globe. But the geological event likely acted as a powerful accelerator, a shock to the system that helped tip the balance in Europe. The slow death of one world, a realm of hunter-gatherers intimately tied to a vast wilderness, may have inadvertently midwifed the birth of another, the Neolithic world of fixed villages, wheat fields, and domesticated animals. It is a profound irony that the loss of a continent of plenty helped push humanity toward a revolution where we would learn to create our own. For all our maps and models, the people have remained just out of reach, their most intimate stories still locked in the dark. The sheer scale of what we do not know is as compelling as what we have found. One of the most basic yet elusive questions is simply, how many of them were there? Estimating the population density of a drowned continent is a formidable challenge. We know the land was rich and could support life, but were there scattered family bands roaming a vast wilderness? Or were there thriving, interconnected communities clustered along its rivers and coasts? The answer would tell us whether this was a sparsely populated frontier or a beating heart of Mesolithic Europe, a distinction that changes the entire narrative of the era. This leads directly to another mystery: did they trade? The discovery of a piece of distinctive stone, like a particular type of flint not native to where it was found, could reveal networks of exchange stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Did someone from the hills of Kerry a prized tool made from Scandinavian flint? Did shells from a southern coast make their way north as ornaments or tokens? Evidence of such movement would prove these were not isolated groups, but people connected to a wider social world, sharing materials, ideas, and perhaps even marriage partners across the ancient landscape. Their spiritual world is perhaps the greatest silence. We can infer from practices elsewhere that they likely honored their ancestors and held beliefs about the natural world, but the specifics are gone. Did they place offerings in lakes or rivers? Did they mark special places in the landscape with carved posts or arrangements of stones? Without a single confirmed burial site we cannot know how they treated their loved ones at the end of life, a universal human practice that tells us so much about a culture's values and hopes. The question of conflict is equally shadowy. In a land of apparent plenty, was there competition that turned violent? Archaeologists on dry land sometimes find evidence of that era, like human remains with projectile points embedded in bone, telling a story of interpersonal strife. But has the North Sea preserved any such somber evidence? Or does the lack of it suggest that, for long periods, the vastness of provided enough space and resources to avoid such tensions? Their artistic expression is another vanished chapter. We have the beautiful, functional form of their tools, but did they also carve patterns into antler, paint symbols on leather, or adorn themselves with intricate beads? Organic art decays quickly, leaving us to wonder if we are missing an entire dimension of their creativity and identity. All these mysteries converge on the single most pressing question: where did they truly live? We have scattered tools and butchered bones, but the settlement sites, the actual homes and hearths around which daily life unfolded, remain hidden. Finding one would be the key that unlocks everything else. It would show us their architecture, their social organization, their craft areas, and their refuse piles, a complete snapshot of a community in time. This unanswered question is what fuels every new survey and drives the collaboration between fishermen, divers, and scientists. It is a reminder that for all our advanced technology, the North Sea still holds its most profound secrets close, inviting us to keep listening, to keep searching for the echoes of a world that refuses to be forgotten. There is a library whose books are written in mud and bone. Protecting the fragile pages of story presents a conservation challenge unlike any other on Earth. The sites are invisible, scattered across thousands of square miles of some of the world's busiest, most industrialized waters. This is not an archaeological park with clear boundaries and guardrails. It is a ghostly landscape lying directly in the path of modern progress. The primary threat is a constant, grinding force: bottom trawling. Heavy fishing gear is dragged across the seabed, its weighted nets and metal doors acting like a massive, indiscriminate plow. In a single pass, a trawler can scrape away centuries of protective silt, scattering delicate artifacts or crushing them entirely, erasing the precise context that gives them meaning. Alongside this are the permanent marks of infrastructure. Every telecommunications cable buried in a trench, every pipeline laid for oil and gas, and every massive foundation for an offshore wind turbine represents a point of no return for whatever lies beneath. These projects, vital for our modern world, churn the seabed in ways that can obliterate a prehistoric campsite before anyone even knows it was there. Even nature itself is an agent of decay. Strong currents constantly reshape the sandy bottom, while storms can stir up sediments and expose fragile remains to further damage. The very environment that preserved these sites is now, in some places, actively working against their survival. Faced with this front challenge, conservationists are pioneering strategies to protect what cannot be seen. One promising approach is the creation of marine protected areas with specific archaeological significance. This does not mean stopping all activity in vast swaths of the North Sea, but rather implementing managed use. In zones of high archaeological potential, authorities could restrict certain destructive practices like bottom trawling, or require detailed seabed surveys before any new industrial activity begins. This treats the submerged landscape with the same care we would afford a World Heritage Site on land, acknowledging that its cultural value is immense and irreplaceable. Another critical tool is the archaeological watching brief. For major offshore projects, like the installation of a wind farm, heritage experts are now often embedded in the planning process from the start. They review seabed survey data, identify areas of concern, and can recommend slight adjustments to the placement of a cable route or a turbine foundation to avoid a potential site. In some cases, they may even supervise a targeted rescue excavation if a significant find is made in the path of necessary development. This proactive collaboration turns industrial necessity into an opportunity for discovery and documentation, ensuring that knowledge is rescued even if the site itself cannot be saved. Ultimately, the long-term protection depends on a shift in awareness. The goal is to help everyone who uses the sea, from fishermen to energy companies to recreational sailors, see themselves as stewards of this hidden heritage. Outreach programs educate trawlermen on identifying artifacts, turning them from accidental disturbers into first responders for history. Industry guidelines are being developed to standardize how archaeological risk is assessed for offshore projects. The underlying principle is that this lost continent is a shared inheritance. Its story does not belong to any one nation, but to humanity as a whole. Managing it effectively requires a shared sense of responsibility, a collective agreement that the drive to power our present must be balanced with a duty to preserve the deep past. This invisible landscape, a testament to human resilience and adaptation, now faces a new test: our willingness to protect a world we can barely see for the sake of understanding our own. The power of this story lies not in its distance, but in its closeness. Resonates because it mirrors our own deepest questions about home, memory, and belonging. We all carry personal histories, stories of places our families left behind, whether a neighborhood that changed or a homeland across an ocean. That sense of a lost origin point is a shared human thread. Amplifies that feeling to a continental scale, offering a tangible, physical place where so many of our collective journeys in Europe began. It is the ultimate family story, written in geology rather than genealogy. This connection transforms cold data into a narrative that feels strangely personal. When we look at a map of the North Sea, we are not just looking at empty blue space. We are looking at the ghost of a backyard, a hunting ground, a childhood landscape for countless generations. That realization carries a quiet, profound weight. It bridges the gap between the abstract past and our lived present. The romance of a sunken world is undeniable, echoing myths of Atlantis and other lost civilizations that have always captivated us, but is different. Its mystery is not locked in fantasy, but is being patiently decoded with seismic scanners and DNA analysis. This union is uniquely compelling, the haunting allure of a drowned land rigorously confirmed by the precise language of science. We get to have the wonder and the proof. It satisfies both the dreamer who yearns for forgotten worlds and the rational mind that demands evidence. This story also delivers a humbling perspective on our own place in time. We live on maps that feel permanent, with borders etched in stone and coastlines that seem eternal, shatters that illusion. It demonstrates with stunning clarity that our world is fluid, that continents can become seas, and that the most stable ground can vanish in a geological blink. The very coastline someone is walking along today may one day be a legend for future people. This is not a cause for alarm, but for a deeper awareness. It connects us to the long rhythm of the planet, reminding us that human history is just one layer in a much deeper story. Ultimately, that is why this lost civilization captivates us so completely. It is more than an archaeological topic, it is a reflection. In its drowned hills and silent rivers, we see our own searches for identity, our own fragile footprints on a changing earth, and our own enduring need to understand where we came from. By recovering its echoes, we are not just learning about them, we are quietly rediscovering a forgotten chapter of ourselves. The immense scale of this vanished world defies any one nation's borders. To truly understand, we must think beyond the modern map, beyond the exclusive economic zones and territorial waters that now slice the North Sea into separate domains. The civilization that thrived here knew no such divisions. Its people walked a continuous landscape from what is now England to Denmark. Its story is a single, seamless narrative lying in fragments across the seabeds of multiple countries. Unlocking that full story, therefore, demands something equally seamless, a level of international cooperation rarely seen in archaeology. This is not just a scientific challenge, it is a diplomatic and philosophical one, centered on a fundamental question: who does this past belong to? The answer must be, it belongs to everyone. No single nation can or should manage this heritage alone, for no single nation holds the complete picture. A trawler working in Dutch waters may haul up a tool made from flint that originated in ancient Britain. A seismic survey for a German wind farm might image a river channel that once flowed into a valley now under Danish jurisdiction. The clues are hopelessly intermixed, a jigsaw puzzle whose pieces are scattered across national desks. To solve it, scientists, policymakers, and industry leaders from all the North Sea bordering countries, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, and Norway, must create a unified framework. This means moving past isolated projects and building a permanent consortium. It requires the free and open sharing of data, from decades-old industrial seismic scans to the latest high-resolution sonar, maps from university research vessels. It calls for coordinated, multinational research expeditions, where vessels and expertise are pooled to survey vast transects of seabed in a single, coherent campaign. Perhaps most critically, it necessitates harmonizing legal protections. Currently, the laws governing underwater cultural heritage vary significantly from one country to the next. What is a protected site in one nation's waters might have far weaker safeguards just a few nautical miles away. A unified approach would establish common standards for preservation, ensuring that a site deemed significant off the coast of Yorkshire receives the same respectful consideration as one off the coast of Jutland. Funding, of course, is the engine that makes all this possible. Joint initiatives, supported by multinational grants from bodies like the European Union or global scientific foundations, could fund the kind of ambitious, long-term exploration this mystery deserves. Imagine a dedicated international research vessel, a floating laboratory staffed by rotating teams of experts from every bordering nation, systematically surveying and sampling the lost continent season after season. This vision is not about ceding sovereignty, but about embracing shared stewardship. Viewing as a common European, and indeed a human, inheritance transforms the mission. It shifts the perspective from one of ownership to one of guardianship. The goal is no longer for Britain or the Netherlands to tell their piece of the story, but for all of us to collaborate in telling the whole story. This cooperative spirit is the only way to ensure the legacy of this lost civilization is pieced together comprehensively, preserved with the utmost care, and passed on as a complete chapter for future generations to study, appreciate, and learn from. In a world often divided by borders, the silent plains beneath the North Sea offer a powerful reminder of our deeper, shared origins, and a compelling reason to work together in uncovering them. That bone harpoon was a message from the deep, and we have learned to read its language. The story of is not a closed book resting on the seabed, but an ongoing conversation between the past and our present. From a single artifact in a fishing net to the ghostly river valleys mapped by sound, we have slowly reassembled the saga of a lost continent. This is far more than a historical puzzle. It is a profound lesson written in silt and stone. It shows us the incredible resilience of our ancestors, people who thrived for thousands of years on a land that was literally dissolving beneath their feet. Their world was transformed not by war or invasion, but by the relentless, impersonal force of a changing climate, a reminder that the ground we think is permanent is anything but. The drowning of holds up a mirror to our own time. We live in an era of rising seas and climatic shifts, with coastal cities and communities facing an uncertain future. This lost civilization offers a long view, a 10,000-year perspective on the power of environmental change to redraw the map of human habitation. It teaches humility, showing that even the most successful cultures are part of a much larger planetary story. Yet, the lesson is not one of despair, but of continuity. The people of that sunken world did not vanish. They adapted, migrated, and carried their legacy into new lands. Their story is woven into the genetic and cultural fabric of modern Europe, a testament to the enduring human spirit of innovation and survival. The search continues with every survey, every core sample, and every curious fisherman's find. Each discovery adds another sentence to this epic, submerged chapter of who we are. It connects us to a deep past that feels both unimaginably distant and strangely familiar, a foundational piece of the human journey waiting to be remembered. If this exploration into our shared origins resonated with you, please subscribe for more journeys to history's greatest mysteries. We would love to hear your thoughts on this lost world in the comments below.